Anyway, Philip Ingram, I'd love to hear what you have to say about what my next guest has to say. He is Yoaz Hendel. He's a former Israeli government minister and an IDF reservist and a battalion commander, and joins us right now. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Yoaz.
Thank you.
Thank you for on this day of all days. We are marking this horrific anniversary of one of the most horrific events we've seen, certainly in my lifetime, the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. The day is playing out not just as a day of sort of looking back at what happened on that day for those families living in Greece, but also looking forward, particularly for the families of the hostages who are still being held. Some are 100 hostages thought still being held. Some, we fear, may be dead, possibly a third of them. Their bodies still being held by Hamas, but we don't know. How much of today is about, do you think, looking back at what happened, and how much is about looking forward and trying to bring those hostages home and to make Israel safe?
It's a mix. It's very personal and very national, and we all into this story in the last year. I don't think it's a normal that a former minister in a government now is a battalion commander and is going to do a reservist service when he's 49, and all my battalion is actually guys like me, former special units guys, that took a decision to go back to the army and to help Israel. I don't think it's normal that a democratic and liberal country find itself fighting 7 fronts in south of Lebanon, against the organizations in Syria, in Iraq, against Hamas, and of course against the main source of evil in the Middle East and the source of instability, Iran. I don't think it's normal that we still have 101 people, hostages, that right now still in the tunnels of Hamas, and no one is putting pressure against Hamas except for Israel. And so our goal today is, first of all, to defeat our enemies and to make sure that our kids can live peacefully and can sleep quietly in the north and in the south. And after that, to make sure that we are building or rebuilding Israel in internal and domestically, and of course outside, to make sure that we are safe.
But this has been the interesting thing, the international reaction, obviously, in the first few days, much support, much sympathy, much empathy and understanding. But then as the weeks, the months have carried on, so much more of the concern has been for civilians, particularly children, of course, in Gaza, and now, of course, in Lebanon with the attacks on Hezbollah as well. And so much focus from the United Nations, indeed from allies, including the US, and as we saw from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, at the weekend, and indeed from our own government here. Question marks about Israeli tactics, question marks about Israelis, bombing of both Lebanon and Hamas. And the focus has been on basically on, you need to come to the negotiating table, that you need to make agreements with Hamas, and that war is not the answer. Why do you think Israel is being expected to behave in a way that I can guarantee to you right now, not a single Western nation and no other nation would dream of having to behave in that way if it were them? If it were us, we know what America did after 9/11. We would never dream of saying, yeah, let's absolutely go to the negotiating table with our attackers and not be expected to exact not just an ability to protect ourselves, but also a level of revenge and retaliation. What do you make of the higher standards that Israel is being held to in not just its reactions, but also the conduct of its war?
Hypocrisy. I see the pro-Palestinians protests in the UK and Europe, and from my point of view, it's a kind of dangerous impact, because Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas are the enemies of the West, not only of Israel. And Israel is fighting their war. Of course that we appreciate the support of the UK and the Western countries, but they need to ensure that Israel wins. Otherwise, they will find those enemies in Britain, and they will find those attacks in the US and in other countries in Europe. And unfortunately, it seems that every modern country today is trying to minimize the conflict, which is a kind of a slogan to say we would like to not take any decisions and to wait until we will see that there is nothing to do. And we are in the Middle East. You know what? In a new Middle East, we understand today that even if we want to keep our quiet and tranquillar atmosphere, we have nothing to do except for to go and to defeat our enemies and to protect our kids. And with all the respect to the question marks overseas, my role, my job, my main mission today is to make sure that my kids, and I have 4 kids, to make sure that they are safe enough and to make sure that those terrorists and those Nukhba and other Israel enemies, that the only thing that they want to do is to slaughter Jews just because they are Jews without any connection to their political opinions, if they are left or right, government supporters or government or against the government. The only thing that they ask to do is to kill Jews. And my mission, my generation mission, is to make sure that Israel is safe enough to make sure that the 7th of October is not happening again, not in the northern front and not in the south.
Yeah.
And we will do that with all the criticisms that we are getting. And I can assure you that I know completely. I have a PhD in military history. I know exactly what other armies, respectable armies, had done in the past. And we are doing whatever we can in order to minimize the damage of civilians. But those organizations are using civilians as a human shield, and we will not stop until we will defeat our enemies.
Yeah, again, the thing I find so frustrating is so much of the criticism. And look, there are always valid criticisms to make, and I would make them of our own government in terms of the conduct of any war, of any individuals or certain policies. But the extraordinary thing that no one seems to have suggested at all in all these UN bodies and the others, and is that, you know what, Hamas could just lay down their weapons, and Hezbollah could not fire weapons into Israel, and Hamas could hand back the hostages, and then we wouldn't be seeing that war. Israel people would say would have no justification at that point, and yet no one seems to think that is the actual solution to the issue. Can I ask you just finally though about the hostages, because we spoke a little bit earlier on the show to Efrat Machikawa. She's the niece of Gadi Moses, who has turned 80 years old since he's been held in captivity. She and her family have been very critical of Benjamin Netanyahu's government and saying, look, that he's been sabotaging the negotiations and the talks, and they want peace, but they want their families home. That's their number one priority. It is one of the priorities of the Israeli government, but it's not the only priority. It's about defeating Hamas and preventing another October the 7th. What do you say to the families of hostages who say the priority needs to be just getting our loved ones home? Pretty much, I think they're saying, at any cost.
First of all, I understand them, and I deeply feel the sorrow and the feelings after 1 year that them families members are still there in the Hamas hands. Secondly, I'm one of the people that do not support my government, but I support my country. And I'm doing what I'm doing, risking my life and my colleagues' life in order to protect the state of Israel, not the government. And even those that we are strong democracies, there are debates inside Israel about our tactics, our strategy. We all agree that without defeating our enemies, without putting a lot of pressure on our enemies, military pressure, it will be very hard to convince them to do the right thing. And unfortunately, and this is a question that you raised, and I will repeat on it, there are so many members of the UN and players that call Israel to take an action in order to compromise. And I don't hear even one voice that's standing loud and clear and saying to the Hamas, to Hezbollah, stop attacking Israel, stop launching rockets, put your weapons on side and release those hostages. This is the normal and the natural call for those terrorists. And no one is calling them to do that. The only calls are against Israel or criticize Israel. We appreciate all the support that we'll get, but I'm using my stage in order to call other players in the international community to do the right thing. We need you, the world needs you, and you need us to defeat those enemies. They are the world enemies.
Really interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Yoaz Hendel, a former Israeli government minister, now an IDF reservist and battalion commander. Thank you for that. Philip Ingram, listening to all of that, you were nodding along to some of it. It is one of those things, again, and what's interesting, of course, there is a debate going on in Israel. Netanyahu is not a popular figure among many. He has to rely on the very sort of hard right for him to actually even remain in power. But the point is, in Israel, you're allowed to have a debate, an open debate, and you're not killed for it. And you not name another country in the Middle East where you can have such a free debate. You can go and demonstrate against your government and not end up, being tortured or executed, for goodness sake. But this is the thing. There is a very big difference, isn't there, between supporting a particular government policy and supporting the country. And again, why we are not seeing clear messages coming out from UN and other Western allies about what Hamas and Hezbollah need to do, because everything seems to be what Israel needs to be. They completely forget who the assailants are. Well, exactly, and Yoaz is 100% right. You're calling the international community out as hypocritical, that it is with the UN, and he mentioned something there that I think people who are listening need to be aware of. Hamas and Hezbollah are infiltrating the UK today. We're outside the rocket range, but we're inside their terror range, and they're setting up the cells, and it's being organised and orchestrated by Iran through the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, their Quds force. They're the ones that coordinate everything that's going on from a terror perspective in the Middle East. They are preparing for whatever they want to plan in the future in the UK, across Europe and elsewhere. And we know they do. I mean, I want to talk in the next few moments, actually, after a quick break, about the prevent strategy, which now getting worried about boys who are misogynistic, who don't like women, the Andrew Tate influenced people, as opposed to people who are trying to blow us up. Genuinely quite scary.